Hi friends, we at GLC would like to take a quick moment to thank you for watching our programs on this platform, and we'd like to ask you for a little favor. Would you please go beneath this video and click the subscribe button? Did you know that by simply subscribing to the GLC YouTube channel, you can help us financially support the programs on this platform? You'll need to be signed into YouTube beforehand, but if not, simply click the subscribe button and YouTube will automatically walk you through the steps to sign in or to create an account. By taking these simple steps, you will not only ensure that you continue to receive our unique programming and gain instant access to the hundreds of videos we post, but more importantly, you'll also be telling YouTube that GLC's content is worth watching and promoting. Likewise, if you enjoyed a specific program, please click the thumbs up button below, which also helps inform YouTube that this is a program worth recommending. Finally, once you have logged in and subscribed, please click the notification bell below in order to receive announcements when we post new content. As usual, feel free to post your questions and comments in the comments section below. We always love hearing from our friends and viewers. Again, thank you for watching and supporting God's Learning Channel. We couldn't spread the message of the gospel without you. Be blessed, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Hi, shalom. Welcome back to Ezekiel's Wheel. We are continuing. As a matter of fact, I think probably this particular day we'll actually get to Ezekiel's Wheel, maybe. We've spent all this time kind of giving you the background. And I always think the background is necessary in order to fully establish my point when we get done with it. So I wanted to give you some more background of the cyclical idea of how things work. So for the last time, we were talking about a very important verse, at least to me, maybe not to you, but a very important verse in the book of James. As a matter of fact, if you really didn't pay attention to it, you may not even know it was there. You may just kind of gloss over it. But we were talking about how during the context of warning of teachers and their words and so forth, and once again, that would include mine as well, that be careful because you're going to be held accountable for it. Now, the reason why I think he's holding them so accountable for their words and responsible for them is because the Father knows, once again, that everything that's going on at the end is in the beginning. And so he already knows that there's going to be ministries and organizations and people and so forth that are going to want to destroy the beginning, because that's the foundation. Because once again, what can the righteous do if the foundations be destroyed? And so if they're teaching, if the words that come out of their mouth are in for the express purpose of destroying and corrupting the things in the beginning. Now in James it's called the course of nature, or literally in Greek, the wheel or cycle of Genesis. And so we're gradually going to be working our way back here to what are these cycles in Genesis. But keep in mind, whatever it is, it starts in the beginning, because that's really what the book of Genesis is all about. I think what the Father's saying here, even though he's using in the Greek genesios, translated as Genesis, but what he's saying is their words destroy the foundations. They destroy the things in the beginning. I think it's the things that Peter or Kepha was concerned about with those mockers in the last days, who are going to say, where's the promise? Ever since the fathers fell asleep, so on and so forth, where there's a promise of his coming, and all those kind of things. The idea is, and that's the idea of evolutionary type of thinking, is to totally reconstruct how things began as these slow evolutionary processes over time. And once again, we're talking about macroevolution, not microevolution, but that's another whole thing. Now, let me give you a couple of examples of how this word is used and how words similar to it, because there's some synonyms to this word trakon. The word trakon in Greek was translated as a wheel or a cycle. I believe in your English it's the word that's translated as course there, but it's a cycle or a wheel. It's trakon in the Greek. Now Hebrew has several Hebrew words that are behind that one Greek word, trakon. One of those we're going to talk about a little later is ophan. Ophan, and we'll talk about what that means a little bit later. But the other one I want to talk about is agol. Agol. And we've talked about this word before on our Words Mean Things series. I don't know, maybe that was a year ago or something, but I do want to talk about it again right now. And it's found in Psalm 23. As a matter of fact, Travis, if you can bring up the screen now. Psalm 23, verse 3. You're familiar with this verse. We've talked about it before. Mizmor 23:3 says, He restores. Now notice the word restore once again, because that is our context anyway. That word once again is shuv in Hebrew, to go back to take something back to the way it was. Remember, man came from dust, and from the dust he will shuv. He will go back. So David's pleading with the Father to restore my soul back to the way it was. I believe in the context here, back in harmony with the Father's heart, with the Father's ways, is what he's saying. And then he goes on to say, He leads me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Stay with me there a minute, Travis. Now, it's translated paths in the English there. There are lots of other perfectly good Hebrew words that are used in your biblical texts for what we would consider a path. Like the Hebrew word nativ, which is He leads me in straight paths and so forth. So there's already good words that denote the idea of what we would think as a long, straight, linear path that someone's traveling down. That's not the word that's used here. The word used here, as you can see, is agol. Now that first little kind of backwards apostrophe there is an ayin. That is the Hebrew letter ayin that's transliterated. The word is agol. That is the base word for this word that's translated as paths, I believe, erroneously, in Psalm chapter 23:3, but rather cycles of righteousness. So David's saying, He restores my soul and He leads me in these cycles of righteousness. Why? For His name's sake. Come on back to me, Travis. For His name's sake, He's going to lead them in these cycles. In other words, His reputation, His authority is at stake here, because that's what the word shame here means. The word name in English here is pronounced in Hebrew shame. Some of us say shem, all right, but it's actually pronounced shame. And so it's not just an idea of the proper articulation of the letters of someone's name, like Brad or Bob or Harry and so forth. But the word in Hebrew actually means source of authority. I'm not going to go into take time to go into the background of that right now, but it's this authority at stake here is what he's talking about, not just some articulation of proper letters and so forth. So that's what's at stake here. So he says, restore me back to your cycles of righteousness. Now, once again, cycles of righteousness in Hebrew is a Hebrew idiom. The cycles of righteousness in Hebrew are found in the yearly cycle. Now, the yearly cycles in Hebrew are the 7 feasts of Yahweh. Those are yearly cycles. Chagim, or festivals. As a matter of fact, the word chag is a cognate or a related word to this word agol, which we're going to break down here in just a few minutes. But so we have 7 cycles every year that occur in the Feast of Yahweh. The first of those cycles is called Shabbat. When you read Vayikra or Leviticus chapter 23, you'll see that the first feast, if you will, the first cycle, is actually Shabbat itself. Now, why is that important? Because we're going to, I hope to establish a little bit later that that's going to be the axle or the hub of this wheel within a wheel. But we'll just put this thing together very slowly until we get there. Now, that is at the core of this. The monthly cycles in Hebrew, of course, is Rosh Chodesh, what we call the new moon. We even have women have a menstrual cycle. That is another monthly cycle. We have part of the cycles of righteousness in Hebrew is the weekly cycle. What's the weekly cycle? Shabbat, once again. So every week we have a cycle. Every month we have cycles. Every year we have cycles. We have the 4 seasons, which are the cycles. We have daily cycles. What are the daily cycles? Well, in the morning the sun comes up, and in the evening the sun goes down. And guess what happens the next day? Same cycle. Surprise, surprise. Sun comes up, sun sets down. So we have cycles not only going on daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, but we have cycles that are going on extremely fast inside of us. I mean, in nanoseconds, we have cycles going on. We have our cells reproducing and duplicating and so on and so forth. So the bottom line, of course, here is that everything operates in these cycles. So once again, it's not as if he hasn't given us enough evidence from the very beginning. So in David's pleading to the Father, this is probably during one of those times, at least some Bible commentators think that this is probably in the midst of those times when David, remember, has had a son that's died and so forth because of something that he has done. And so he's drifted away from the Father. And so he's pleading back to the Father, please restore me, restore my soul, restore my life. And when you do, in context, lead me in your cycles of righteousness. Why? Because it's your authority here that's at stake. And for the sake of your authority, lead me back into these things. So that's what these cycles are all about. Now, another example, if you can put the next one back up on the screen here, Travis, is in Proverbs chapter 4, 26 and 27. It says, ponder the path of your feet. Let all your ways be established. Turn not to the right hand nor to the left. Remove your foot from evil. Now notice a couple of things. Number one, it says ponder the cycles of your feet and let all your ways be established. So here's that word agol once again, which contains the letters G and L. Now, we're not going to get that to yet, but just give me a little bit here, and we're going to start to break this word down to show you how fascinating this beautiful language of your Bible is. But notice, he says, ponder the path or cycles of your feet. I want you to know right now that not every time you see the English word path is that the Hebrew word agol. Don't assume that. You need to look it up. You need to do your homework. Sometimes it is the Hebrew word for a path, a straight, linear kind of a thought process. But many times it's not. I'm just going to give you 2 or 3 examples where it should be cycles translated. And then he goes on to say, not only ponder the cycles of your feet, but let all your ways be established. Then he says, don't turn to the right hand nor to the left, and remove your foot from evil. Now remember when we first started out this series, when I read the first chapter of Ezekiel, remember those cherubim, remember those faces, and remember those wheels that they were told several times, not just once or twice, but several times, do not go to the right and do not turn to the left. Come on back to me, Travis. Don't go to the right or don't go to the left. Now that's the same thing said here in the Proverbs. The Proverbs says the same thing about his life and establishing how he is supposed to walk before our Father. He says the same thing. Now, let's bring back up, Travis, Proverbs chapter 4, verse 11, because we're going to have another example where it says, I have taught you in the way of wisdom. I have led thee in right paths. Once again, this is the Hebrew word agol. Now, the Greek word there is trachea. Trachea, as you can see at the bottom of your screen. Remember, that is our word wheel that we read in James chapter 3, verse 6, or Yaakov chapter 3, verse 6, that whatever these teachers are doing, whatever these ministries or whatever these things are doing, they're destroying, they're corrupting, they're setting on fire and destroying the things in the very beginning. And in Greek, that is trachon. Here's an example, a cognate of that, but it's translated here as this word agol. Come on back to me again, Travis. So he's saying that he has taught us this way from the very beginning. He's saying that over and over and over, I have already taught you these ways. That is the way a father teaches children. That's the way all of us as parents, I know I've said this before too, I really don't want to belabor this, but if we can begin to see the commandments of our God, not as legislation, but as instructions of a father, if we can see them in a familial, is the word we use, way, rather than a legislative way, if we can see them as parental, the commandments and instructions and statutes and judgments of our God would seem, I'm going to submit to you, much different. But because of the way our minds are trained to think, we look back at these things in the Old Testament and we see them as, some judge on a bench with long white hair and a big gavel in his hand and slamming it down and going, guilty. And sometimes we're just kind of trained to look at the commands of God that way. And so naturally, it would be easy for some religious person to come along and say, well, hey, we've been freed from that, hallelujah. Well, of course, that would kind of resonate with us if that's the way we're taught the commandments of God are. Now, I'm talking about the commandments of our Father. I'm talking about the Torah. I'm talking about His instructions and His ways. I'm not talking about the commandments of religious systems. When we read 1 John, let me read this to you as a matter of fact. When we read the first epistle of John, chapter 5, I want to read to you what it does say, and then I want to mention to you what it does not say. Now, I didn't plan on doing this, so I'm going to have to find this here. All right. Okay, in 1 John chapter 5, it says, starting in verse 1, whosoever believeth that Yeshua is the Messiah is born of God. And everyone that loves him that begat, loveth him also that is begotten of him. Now, just a simple way of saying, you can't say you hate the brethren and love him. All right, so if you're going to love him, you're going to have to love the brethren as well. Then he goes on to say, but this we know, that we love the children of God when we love God and keep his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous. His commandments are not grievous. Now, notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say that man's interpretation of his commandments are not grievous. Notice it didn't say that. What it's saying, and we've got to get this in our spirit, we've got to get this in our heart, because it's a matter of life and death, and it's the matter of our survival of our culture, not just winning an intellectual, theological debate. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose of restoring the commandments and his ways back to our culture is to turn our world upside down, to be a light into our world, and to be able to restore things back to our fathers' hearts and the hearts of our fathers. And so many times what we understand the Torah to be, grievous and so forth, is really various people's interpretations of the commandments of God, which, my friends, would include my own. I'm not excluding me out of any of this. We're not all perfect at interpreting and understanding all the commandments of God. I don't know if that shocks some of you, but I don't care who you are, how long you've been doing this, we don't all understand the Bible perfectly. I hope that's kind of a given. And so, but sometimes we confuse, or we think that someone's interpretation of Shabbat, for example, or some religious institution's interpretation of how you observe a feast, or even wearing tzitziot, which you see me wear. They're in here somewhere. Wearing the tzitziot and so forth. It's what people have told us those things mean, or told us they're therefore that we base our understanding of the Torah on, rather than the Torah itself. And so we're not responding to the commandments of God. Why? Because the commandments of God are not grievous. I believe in some versions it says they are not burdensome. His aren't. It's our commandments and our ways that are burdensome. And I believe that is what Yeshua is freed us from. And we're going to talk about that, I think, in a few weeks from now, because I think our next series is going to be more of an apologetic one. We're going to start dealing with some of the sayings of Paul. I think I'm going to be doing in a few weeks. Some of the things that Paul says, that everybody says he said that he really didn't say, if you will. And we're going to address these kind of issues later about that middle wall of partition and so forth, the blotting out of handwriting of ordinances that was against us, and some of those verses. Because I believe that's what we're freed from, is the burdensome things that men lay on each other, not what the Father gives us. That's not what's being talked about here. Okay, so once again, we're going back to restoring these things and bringing them back to where they were in these cycles. Now, the word that's used here in Hebrew that's translated as paths in Psalm chapter 23, and the one the Proverbs just used, and the two that I quoted from the Proverbs as well, is agol. Now in Hebrew, that is an ayin, a gimel, and a lamed. For those of you who are familiar with the language, are familiar with the names of the letters, at least know the letters of the language, you'll know that you'll recognize those three letters. Ayin, Gimel, Lamed. Now each one of those letters in Hebrew has an actual meaning in and of itself. The way this beautiful language is designed is that the meaning of the whole word is based upon the meaning of the individual letters that form the word. Now, I don't want any confusion, so I'm going to say that again. The meaning of the whole word, particularly when we break it down to its root, base, the meaning of the whole word is based upon the collection of the individual meaning of the letter that form the words. It's such a beautiful design language. It's not like learning German or French or Latin or just any other language. This is the language that created the universe, my friends. And science, which we're going to cover on our Area 51 series, part 2, whenever we get to that, okay? Science, good, hard, empirical science, not evolution, now understands the things that were written in the Bible. It's like all this time the Father's been sitting up there going, yeah, when are you going, you guys? Pretty soon, man, if he searches enough, is going to find out what the Father already told us in the first place. That's why the Bible says, if you seek me, you shall find me. You know you're in a religious system when they do not encourage you to seek God anymore. If they have an attitude like, well, you don't need to seek anymore, you found it. You got the right one. Here, sign this card. Whatever, okay. You found the right place. You know you're in a religious system when you get in something involved like that. You always want to be seeking God. You always, because that's the way a child would always react to their parents. I always want to know what you want to teach me. Keep feeding me, keep teaching me these things. And so, once again, when we learn how the language works, we realize it's by absolute design. And the reason why the creation is by design is because the word that created it is by design. And that's the way these individual letters work. And so the two primary fundamental letters in this word translated as paths, but in Hebrew actually means to make a cycle. And next week we will draw these things out for you, is Ayin, Gimel, Lamed. The two primary letters are the Gimel and the Lamed. Now, a Gimel is the Hebrew letter for a foot. Next week we'll draw this for you. I'll just do some of the explaining now. The Lamed is the Hebrew letter that's represented by a shepherd's staff. So the Gimel is represented by a foot, and the Lamed is represented by a shepherd's staff. And so together, these two words mean to lead by the foot. To take your foot and lead something by your foot. So that's why you have a Gimel and a Lamed. So now, every word in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, in your Bible, that has a Gimel and a Lamed in it, particularly if they're together, but that's another whole teaching, has something to do with leading something with the foot. Primarily, it's going to be the idea of rolling something over. Gimel and Lamed has something to do with rolling something over or to lead by the foot. Now let me give you an example. I want to take you back to an ancient picture, because truly a picture is worth 1,000 words. I know that's the way I am sometimes too. It's much easier for me to see something visually. And so whenever I do my conferences and seminars, I like to take the words and make them as visual as I possibly can. And so let me give you another vision here so we can capture why Hebrew words that have a Gimel and a Lamed in it will have something to do with that. So in other words, no matter what the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, or 12th letter is, it's still going to have something fundamentally to do with rolling something over and all the nuances or shadows or shading of rolling something over. So picture yourself as a little child. Remember, we are the children of God. You're walking through a field and you see a rock. You see a rock sticking halfway up out of the ground. What do you naturally do when you're walking through a field and you see a rock sticking halfway up out of the ground? I tell you what you do when you're with your kid. You take your foot and you lift it under there and you roll that rock over. And sometimes you'll do it 2 or 3 times and it won't come up because it's in there too deep. So you'll bend over and you'll grab that rock and you'll roll that rock over. Okay? And when you roll that rock over, that process of rolling it over is the Gimel and the Lamed. That's the basis behind that. So when you roll it over, what you have ostensibly done is now you have exposed what was previously concealed. So now you have revealed what was previously concealed. And so if you're walking across the field and you see the rock sticking up out of the dirt or out of the ground, everything underneath that rock, for thousands of years, for all we know, hundreds of years, I don't know, but for a long time, has been not exposed. It's been concealed in the ground. And so when you take the rock and you roll the rock over, now you have revealed what was previously concealed. Sometimes you'll find out that you'll roll it over and there'll be these little critters, like little insects and so forth, that have been there in the nice, soft, moist dirt in the darkness in the ground all this time. And now that you've rolled it over and you expose them to the brightness and the sunshine, you'll see all these little critters running around the rock, scurrying all over the place. Why? You've exposed them to what was previously concealed. And so all things that have something to do with revealing something that was previously concealed have something to do with rolling something over. Okay? So now I want to give you some examples here, and then next week we'll get into some of these examples, and I'll show you next week why this is true in Hebrew, why all these words are family words, why they're all related to each other. They're like a family, because that's the way the Hebrew language is designed. Sentences, a full sentence in Hebrew is designed like a community of people. And the individual words are designed like families, a mom and dad and a child and so forth. And as we break the words down, as we break the community down, we break them down to families and then into children, and then we have mother roots and father roots and child roots of the word. That's the reason why we use those terms, because that's the way a sentence is designed. As a matter of fact, it's no coincidence that in modern Hebrew, the word for syntax in modern Hebrew, which is the syntax means the relationship that words have with one another in a sentence, is the same word used in your Bible for brothers or the companions of Ezekiel chapter 37. They will join themselves with each other when they take the curtains in the tabernacle and they couple them together. That's kavar. That's the same Hebrew word for syntax of a sentence. They're brothers, they're friends, they're hooked together, they're part of something. And then we're going to learn why all these words are related to each other next week. We're going to give you an example, a lot of examples of words that have a G and an L in it. Even when you go to Israel next time, notice Hebrew words and cities that have a G and an L, like Galilee, Golan Heights, and words like that. So we'll finish that next time. In the meantime, cling to your roots that your days may be long, and you will prosper in everything you set your hand to do. We'll see you next time. Shalom Aleichem. Bye.